My name is Jerome Glenn. I direct the Millennium Project, which is a global participatory think tank. It has 32 nodes around the world. By a node, I mean a group of individuals and institutions that identify the best thinkers that they can find, translate questionnaires and do interviews in culturally appropriate ways around the world. And that information is brought together and we put it in the same language, and then it goes back out to the nodes around the world, who then translate it into languages there. So there's a constant in and out process around the world to creating a system for us humans, or we humans, to think together. So it's not a nation-state think tank or a corporate think tank or an ideological think tank, because we have different ideologies involved. And we produce the annual State of the Future report for the last 12 years. I'd preface this by saying that one of the common agreements that most people look at the future have is an important factor is what's referred to as Moore's Law. As you know, the price of computer gets cut in half in about a year and a half, and the capacity doubles in about a year and a half or so. That law, quote unquote, seems to be continuing. If it does, then it's reasonable to say that the processing power of a computer that an individual will have access to will be the equivalent of processing power of the human brain. So each of us would have a partner, or a mental capacity clone, so to speak. If that trend continues, which it may not, but if it does, 25 years after that, or close to your 2058 time, you would have all human beings on the earth, at that point maybe about 9 billion or so people, having the computer processing power of 9 billion people. Let me explain this carefully. Imagine each individual person on the earth having the mental processing power of the entire human species of the earth by 2050. That is hard for us to understand what that really means. Some of the things it would mean is that we would be able to intersect as a species with all the built environment. Where I leave off and you begin, or where this camera begins and where I end, may not be clear. For example, I might have charged couple devices on my lens in 2050. It'll probably be far better than that, because you can do charge couple devices today a little bit. But what you can't do today is have voice activation multi-virtual realities on that charge-activated screen. So I could be living in many worlds at the same time. I will be able to port from one virtual reality to another virtual reality, because right now you don't do that. You play this game or you play that game. Your avatar doesn't go through the games, although in Korea I just talked to some people last year, and we're going to talk about how to get the protocol so you can go around. So imagine the idea of 2058 or so. The people will be looking back today to maybe this video and saying, isn't it amazing? People actually believe they could live in one reality at a time? My God, what's with these people? I mean, it's like, well, you're going to be in a car or you're going to have a telephone. Well, that is no problem. You're in a car with a portable telephone. So imagine that each individual has the ability to be acting in many virtual realities at the same time. And when I say virtual realities, I don't mean what we're talking about in Second Life today, because we're talking 50 years down the road, right? Today, virtual realities have what are called pixels. Pixel is the smallest amount of visual information. A voxel is the smallest amount of three-dimensional information. Voxels are expensive. That's why we don't have them. They've been around 15, 20 years, but they're very expensive. So imagine a voxel magnified up. Here's the smallest amount of three-dimensional visual information. As you turn it this way, it changes from red to green to blue and so forth. So you can program that. Then imagine you can do it this way, the amount of reflectivity or non-reflectivity. And this way, the most amount of opaque or reflectivity, back and forth. So you have three variables on each piece of the smallest visual information. Put that into a virtual reality environment, and that environment will seem more real and more exciting than the reality that you've grown up in. That will be unique. We will spend the vast majority of our time, not only in cyberspace, but in multi-cyberspaces, multi-worlds simultaneously. We will be extremely complex human beings. We will have many identities in many different worlds. And we will be able to make a living out of the coherence, if we're healthy, the coherence of our behavior in these multi-worlds. So let's say you have 10 things you'd like to do in this world. And you say, but I can only get a job in one place and be one way. Well, imagine yourself as not looking for a job, but looking for a market. Let's say you have 10 skills or 10 things you're curious in. How many people in the world are interested in that? In the whole world, maybe 10 people, 20 people, I don't know. Take the second one, you 10 people, 20 people. If there's enough people or organizations or systems in the world that are interested in different parts of you, then you can be healthy. You can be all those things. Let's say you want to teach people how to juggle half an hour each day. You like to do that. It's good for balancing your brain and keeps you healthy, and you're earning an income from doing that. Let's say you like to teach people how to throw boomerangs. Okay, so you can go out in the field, you get some exercise, and so forth. You're outside throwing a boomerang. Let's say you also like to edit papers in scientific journals. Well, but you don't want to do that all day long because that's sort of boring. So you want to do that for periods of time. So let's say that you have a multi-way of being, which is actually maybe healthier than the idea of just being a rice farmer. So we did not have a choice in the past of making a living through all of our manifestations. With processing power at your disposal of 9 billion brains in 2050, you will be able to do things way beyond anything I'm talking about right now. So step number 1, you can assume that the future will be more complex than what I'm talking about now. 2, you can assume, I think, a merger of human consciousness and technology. Because if you're in those multi-virtual realities that I mentioned before with the charged couple devices in your mind, which has to be writing back into the visual cortex that you can see, that and you do voice commands and you talk back and forth, you are, in a sense, telepresence in different locations in different ways. So where do I begin and where do I leave off? It's not quite clear. Also, people will be interacting with me in a variety of ways. So while if this is later in the future, if I'm talking to you, I might have another device over here, and I may be keyword saying things that you don't know that I'm saying the words to. It might be pencil, or it might be pen, it might be bringing up different virtual realities. So I can be going back and forth with different virtual realities out here and different ones over here while I'm talking to you at the same time. That seems far out to people today. It will seem normal in the future. And here's some evidence. I was an experimenter for the National Science Foundation, along with some other futurists back in the late 70s, I think it was, mid to late 70s. We had something where you put in a command. Let's say I'm writing, we had lines each time. We would type something in. I could hit the return key, and I put in a question mark, hit enter, and it would come a little paragraph explaining where I am in the program. I hit 2 paragraphs, comes up everything the computer's got about that. Hit 3 paragraphs, and what is going on here prints out on the Center of Computers staff sitting in front of there at the New Jersey Institute of Technology at that time, and he would come back very quickly. Well, this is what's going on. I could put in 3 question marks and an account number, and then put in a sentence and hit, and can go to somebody else. I could then also put plus link and 2 or 3 numbers with commas, and whatever I typed in went to those 3 people automatically. While I'm doing that, I can also do 3 question marks with no numbers. It goes back to central command, so to speak. I can also put 3 question marks and an account number and a comma, and that you go out. And I can go back to the plus link. You get the idea. So you have many different inputs, outputs in what we now call hot chatting, live chatting. All this sort of instant messaging stuff. But what I could do with those is I could also get this line of this database to that line and send message text to different parts of databases. You can't even do that easily today. But my point is that at first, communicating with many different people at the same time that came back at a different order. So let's say I sent out 5 messages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The responses don't come back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They come back maybe 1, 5, 4, 3. So at first, this is confusing. But after a period of time, I felt relaxed. It was like intellectual free-form jazz, so to speak. It became normal to be having multi-conversations. If you take some of those old cars, you drove them very fast, they start to rattle after a while. You drive them faster, it smooths out, doesn't it? Not supposed to do this, that's the law, but and you drove fast again, it's so there's a point where things sort of hit a nice equilibrium point. And it's the same thing with complexity in the mind's response. We've not really been challenged much. So if you go to a party, sometimes you can listen to a conversation here and a conversation there. Try it out. See if you can listen to 3 instead of 2. And if you can do 3 conversations, can you listen to 4 at the same time? And you'd be surprised how much your brain can do. People make the comment that we only use 10% of the brain. Do you know what 100% of the brain is? Well, if you don't know what 100% of the brain is, then you don't know what 10% is either. Neurons are far more complex than we originally thought. The neurons have hairs, and those hairs have hairs, and those hairs have hairs, and those hairs have hairs, and the only limit so far is the equipment looking at the neuron. Those hairs change length, diameter, and direction on a moment-by-moment basis, which means the complexity of our brain is way beyond any sort of calculation you could normally do. Secondly, turning out that we can re-stimulate the brain to grow new neurons, neuropoiesis. We're learning a great deal. Do a Google search on cognitive science, another Google search on increasing intelligence. And you take a look that our brain capacity is way beyond what we really thought it was before. So the idea of living in many worlds simultaneously might be natural and normal for us in the future. And the idea of being a human unity, of humans interconnected, is the old philosophical, religious idea of we're being one big happy family. Well, that's the trend. We're miniaturizing technology, putting it on our bodies and in our bodies, and we're offloading artificial intelligence and consciousness in our physical environment, and the two will merge into a conscious technology civilization. Now, some people will go, trouble with this idea is it's like the Borgs, science fiction. You know, they're all this big group mind. No. Remember, whatever you look at in the future, most likely will be more complex than you think. So the complexity will be so high is not that we all do groupthink, is that we become more individual than we are even today. Because right now you have so many choices. What I'm talking about is a far more choiceful way of living, so that you actually can develop who you are far more than you ever thought you could before, because you get reinforced. It's a normal sort of psychology thing. If you try to do something and no one wants to do it, you don't get positively reinforced. Well, then you live in a local area that's not accessing all the people of the world, not all the time, but potentially all the people in the world, who also, remember, have the processing power of all the people in the world. That means that your ability to continue to grow and be different and grow and you stimulate your brain into all kinds of different ways will be increasingly very, very unique. One of the dangers is solipsism. Solipsism is the belief that you create the reality yourself. And by finding your own markets around the world and developing yourself and finding new markets for yourself and new activities, you start to maybe think that you are the center of the universe. That's a little dangerous. Hopefully there'll be enough interaction and surprise systems coming in and prompting systems that'll hopefully prevent that. But that is one danger, is that people will think they're the center of the universe. One nice thing about it is that if you're so busy with your world and so interested, you may not be interested necessarily in taking over somebody else's world. But consciousness hacking, brain hacking is an issue to be dealt with. Identifying taking over other people's identities, because if you're boring and you don't want to be boring, you may want to take over the identity of somebody who's not boring to attract more interesting people. This is beginning as we speak, unfortunately. So, how do we make such a conscious technology future better from the point of view of the present tense? Because if this is a possible future, because one can project out humans are becoming more interconnected with technology and the environment is becoming more conscious, it's not big, heavy surprise to say that they could become more interrelated. So how do we make such a world better rather than worse? Because you could have a lot of brain hacking, consciousness hacking, exploitations, information warfare is a big issue in this situation. How do I make it better? In my humble opinion, one of the things we can do today to begin on is the masters of consciousness we throughout the world have called mystics. Now, when I say mystics, I'm not talking about mysticism or any ideologies of that sort of stuff. I'm talking about the mystic, the person who has the experience of the universe being divinely interconnected as a whole thing. So if the human species is going to have this experience being interconnected and so forth, it will be useful to hang out with a few mystics. Not the ideologue mystics. I'm not talking about the ones that calcify the experience into a whole bunch of rules and then kill each other over them. I'm talking about the idea of the general mystic, people who see the interconnectedness of the spiritual quality of humanity and are not particularly hung up on a lot of ideological questions with it. And then the other side of the house is the technocrats. Technocrats I define as somebody who wants to solve a problem by making a technique, a rule, a device, some piece or some rule, some physical thing. The mystic, on the other hand, tends to have the first response to a problem to share consciousness. So take the example of a baby. The little baby has a problem. The mystic response is to love the child. The technocrat response is to clean up the problem or get rid of the cut and put the Band-Aid on. The conscious technology response is love the child while you put the Band-Aid on together. They don't have to be contradictory. How often do you find yourself in a conversation with someone who says, oh, we have to educate the people, we got to raise the consciousness and all that sort of stuff. So, no. We have to make new laws, we have to make new technologies and so forth. No. We have to, you got to do both of them. So one of the things I would suggest as a long-range strategy to make the conscious technology future better is to begin to have conversations between the technocrat and the mystic. And I think that the conversation, you can even role play this yourself. You can sit at home and put an empty chair somewhere and say, I'm going to pretend to be one, the mystic or the technocrat, and then imagine talking to the other one. And then stand up, walk over there, sit down, then reverse roles, so that you're the technocrat next, talking to the mystic. And then you switch roles going back and forth. So you have a little internal dialogue. Because we are all part technocrat, we're all part mystic, but we tend to be more of one than the other. And societies and certain cultures tend to be more than one than the other. And the idea is to make them a union, in the same way that great piano players will talk about becoming one. Well, the piano, the music, and their mind into one performance integration to make it all work. Okay, so maybe we make civilization work and be worthwhile by the merger of the mystic and the technocrat. Now, that's a big polarity. It's one of the biggest polarities and prejudices on the planet throughout time. Because the mystics look down at the technocrats look down at the mystics, and they haven't had a great conversation. So, how do you initiate such a conversation? One is the one I just mentioned. You can do it internally yourself, in the privacy of your own house. The other is, it seems to me that the mystic and those fans of the mystic, which can be sometimes more the problem, the fans of the mystic, it's got to be about the idea that they know the truth of the universe. When you had a little village that didn't talk to another village, you could think you had the truth. But when each village starts to hook up, it's pretty hard to have the same truth if you're saying different things. So, but the attitude of the mystic toward knowledge, the attitude of the mystic toward life, the attitude of the mystic is great. But they don't necessarily understand subject like physics. They don't understand necessarily what we're going to be doing between the relationship between biological systems and nanotech systems. You want knowledge of the technocrat to make the civilization work. But if it's just a technocrat orientation without the mystic attitude, then that's a civilization that's boring. Imagine going to a party and you have two doors to go to two other parties. One door is a party where a bunch of mystics are having a party. And the other door is a bunch of technocrats having a party. Which party is more fun? The mystic, of course. But if the electricity doesn't work, you want the technocrats, right? So stop the prejudice between the two of you. This prejudice is not productive. We need the mystic, we need the technocrat to have a conversation to make the conscious technology civilization work and be worthwhile. That can be your assignment for the present tense, because there's a lot of stuff I'm talking about is going to take a lot of years to happen. And if consciousness, mystic types, are more involved in the design of technology and how it works to enhance consciousness, then with an enhanced consciousness we can design better technology. And with technology that is enhanced our consciousness, we make better choices, and the cycle continues and goes on. So that would be my long-term strategy to make this conscious technology thing in the next 50 years work. Well, in 50 years, I'm hoping that we will have some of us off the planet. Japan has already made the agreement within their country to declare solar satellites as a national objective. My guess is, as Japan makes progress on making solar satellites, for those who don't know, you have a bunch of panels, 22,300 miles geosynchronous orbit going around the Earth. They're far enough out that they're getting sunlight all the time. And you have to worry about the clouds at nighttime. Or the clouds in daytime, for that matter. So it's about a 1 to 10 ratio on the amount of energy that you get per square inch. This stuff then you can bring down to Earth, different locations, you receive it at different locations around the Earth, and that feeds into the electric grids, which means that you can have essentially infinite electricity without greenhouse gases and without nuclear waste problems. As you can guess, there's a lot of people who are not in favor of this, i.e. the entire energy industry is not into it. And NASA hasn't been in favor of it because they learned from the U.S. Congress that they can only have one big project at a time. And the big project right now is a space station. So until a space station is finished, they don't want to talk about the next big deal. Or they'll figure they got their budgets cut. To make a long story short, though, Japan has agreed that they're going to be the first. As they make progress, I think the Americans will say, we're going to do this too. The European Union has done some very good research, by the way, on solar power satellites, and I suspect that they will come in as well. I think this is a logical choice for humanity to make, because it just addresses a whole lot of things, aside from the environmental, and by solving environmental problems and giving economic growth at the same time. It also starts to get us out. It gives the economic base for space migration. Because before, there wasn't an economic base. Usually when people migrate from one place to another, they're going to a place where there's more opportunity, better resources, better food, better something. Well, orbital space, you can't breathe out there too easily. So there has to be something to bring you out there, and energy looks like it's the one. So if Japan does continue and other countries join in, along with Japan, China and India, United States, and European Union and others, but we eventually end up with a sort of INSOLSAT, International Solar Satellite Consortium, just like we have Intelsat for telecommunications around the world. We just do this for energy the same way. If that does begin to happen in 2030, 2040, 2025, 2030, then it'll happen very fast. The reason it happens very fast is you make mechanical spiders that can take these nearby asteroids, and these are the little tiny things that burn up all the time when they hit the Earth. And you use this material for the nanotech process to make the solar satellite material, or anything else that you need to make. As a result, very quickly we'll be able to supply a lot of electricity in the world, as well as the energy resources to start to lead the solar system. So one of the mistakes people do in futures work sometimes is they'll say, okay, here is a year, and then 50 years out, okay, how much change will that be? Well, we look back 50 years, see how much change was there. So there should be about maybe that much change. No, it goes back to Moore's law. The processing power doubles in a year and a half or so. The price comes down in a year and a half or so, which means that increasingly everything that's attached to a computer, which is everything from this recording to wherever you're sitting in your room there somewhere, accelerates. We accelerate the acceleration, and we accelerate the acceleration. And the interconnectivity, because of the software and the embedded chips and all of these sort of things, that the conscious technology means that you can make large-scale system changes quickly. Hence, a 20-year space program from 2020 to 2040 or from 2030 to 2050 would be very fast potential migration compared to the normal linear kind of space programs we thought about in the past. So, one of the things that you might also be a surprise out there, aside from the conscious technology and that stuff, may very well be some people living off the planet. And as we do that, we start to also look back, just as any people who migrate from New Zealand looking back to Europe. I mean, a lot of these migratory groups have new thoughts and new ideas. The astronauts who have left the planet in orbit and look back at the Earth, whether they're cosmonauts or ones from Japan, China, United States, they all talk about what they call this breakaway phenomenon. It's the idea that you start to love humanity as a whole. It's hard to love humanity as a whole when it's broken up into little TV screens or movie screens or radio things or books. They're all fractalized up. But when you look at, with your own eye, look at the Earth as a whole, it's hard not to sort of love our own, Mother, Father, Earth. So as we break away from humanity's birthplace, we may be a little bit more human, a little more consciously evolved. I mean, how many astronauts have become sort of self-centered, stingy? They tend to be more global, pleasant, and that sort of stuff. In the early days of the NASA program, if somebody started to talk about this, they would be afraid that the medical surgeon would say, "Guy's a little crazy. You can't go up in a rocket ship next time. Well, because all these astronauts wanted to go again, they wanted to act as dumb and uninteresting and boring as possible, so no one would think they're crazy. Because if they started to talk about expanding consciousness and all of that sort of stuff, they might get grounded. There's an article in the Air Force Medical Digest by Stan Rosen. You can do a check on this. I think it was called Minds in Space. It's one of the first analysis of this phenomenon. It's been forgotten a bit, but I think that leaving the planet will not only be an advantage economically and culturally and all that sort of stuff, and maybe for making more peaceful civilization, it may also be natural. Take a look at the idea of how we grow as a human being. We have this little zygote getting in the uterus. Now, you got 9 months there. But from the point of view of the zygote, they may not know that. They see the resources running out. Beginning to be crowded by the 7th month. By the 8th month, you got the Club of Rome report in the uterus and these sort of problems. But lo and behold, by the 9th month, a system change, a phase shift occurs. Bing, birth, out a human being. But still, you can't do squat. There you are, you're 100% dependent on the mother, or in this case, in the solar system, the sun. So make an analogy between the humans being born, what they go through, and how we as a human whole family may have to be born. We get the whole game given to us. We've got gravity, we've got oxygen, we've got the sun in day and night condition. I mean, we're walking into a done deal. So just like a baby gets born into a done deal, the diapers are being changed, the breast milk is there, all this stuff's there for you. And you don't have to do squat for years until later you grow up. Well, what happens if we apply this to the idea of 50 years from now? What happens if some humans start to leave the dependency of the sun? We might start to learn what it is to grow up. We have been dependent on the sun, like a baby is dependent on the mother and the father. So maybe we don't even know what our capabilities are. Just like we don't know what the capabilities are of that newborn baby. And the zygote didn't know its capabilities outside the uterus. So 50 years from now is not only a long time, but the changes in the next 50 years will be far more than the previous 50 years. As a matter of fact, I would suspect 50 years from now, we'll look back the last 50 years, and then the 50 years before that, and we'll say, the 50 years from, let's say, 2008 previous to what, 1958, that'll look real slow compared to the next 50 years. So, keep your imagination going, get those mystics and technocrats talking, and imagine how any technology can be more conscious, and how you can be more integrated with technology, and you'll probably be more likely to be successful. Well, I've never been to New Zealand. So,
well, I hope you can, sir.
So I don't know. So I would have to speak in general terms. But clearly, intergovernmental global systems like the European Union and the OAS and the African Union and these different regional organizations are increasing, not decreasing. Clearly, people are self-organizing in cyberspace with new kinds of identity. So yes, they may be from New Zealand, but the person you're dealing with may be from Zambia, and that person may be from Paris. And we may start to create a sort of a new nation culture where people are identifying not only with their biological family, and not only with their geographic family, they may also be identifying with their choice family, which can be non-geographic. And you have many people that identify just with their family, and some people are very patriotic to their own thing. But we may have new forms of identity, what we identify with. So developing New Zealand as New Zealand, okay. What about developing New Zealand as an idea, or New Zealand as a set of cultures, or New Zealand as an aesthetic experience, or New Zealand as an idea? What would that be in cyberspace, in virtual realities and so forth? You can also set up experiments, alternative New Zealands. Here's cyberspace 1, cyberspace 2, cyberspace 3. People do little experiments, how we want New Zealand to be in the future. Oh, let's do a trial run over here, another New Zealand second life, New Zealand third life, New Zealand fourth life. And let people play around with that, and maybe you can invent it. I'm just not knowledgeable enough to tell you about the future of New Zealand, because telling you to do something with sheep in the future, I mean, I don't know enough to tell you what to do with the sheep. It's what, 2008 now. The estimate is somewhere around 2.5 or so billion people will be added to the planet between now and 2058 or so. Because the means of production have been redistributed, or is being redistributed as we speak through internet, and when I say that means of production, you can create your business in one day. You can say you're a witch doctor from New Zealand, and somebody says, that's bizarre, I never heard of a witch doctor from New Zealand, see what this is. It's, consultancy, $10, put your Visa account in here, and we will give you witchcraft advice from New Zealand, or something like that. Okay, so people will be able to make a living in many different ways through internet or its future internet versions. And hence it is reasonable to talk about a lot of people being employed, not only in agriculture, industrial, information society, but completely new ways. People may want to have an experience in New Zealand and want to have a guide walking around the woods there, or walking around the field, the open spaces, with some telecommunications devices, and have a partnership and so forth. So you could be a teleguide, teletourist guide for people all around the world and have an income. Anyway, there'll be many ways to make incomes in the future that haven't been thought of yet. So my guess is that there will be, of these 2.5 billion added to the planet between now and 2058, they'll have more of an income as an average, that the incomes will go up. And the trends are moving that direction already, but the real internet revolution has not kicked in yet. It hasn't kicked in. What I mean by that is revolution, the old revolution, solar earth business, is people believe the sun was here, the earth revolves around it, right? The revolution was reversed. The orbit becomes a center point and then revolve this way. The old idea was the person was here and the market was here and everybody revolves around the market. Well, the internet revolution is the person is here and the whole world revolves around you. But it only revolves around you if you know it, if you know how to act on it. People do not know how to make a living on the internet. I do. The Millennium Project was an invention. There was no request for proposal. No one said to do it. Myself and Ted Gort, we invented it, and we created all these nodes. It's a pure invention. All right? Ted and I like doing future stuff. We like dealing with different cultures, different ideas. So we're making a living out of being what we want to be. Right? So we're an example of how many people can make a living in many different ways. This think tank is just one of them. So these, I'm getting to food. Stay with me here. Of these 2.5 billion people added, my guess is the average wealth of the world will be a lot higher than people are willing to believe today. As income goes up, meat consumption goes up per capita. Now, because you got a lot more per capitas and you got a lot more rich per capita, that means the meat demand is going to be extraordinary. We already have falling water tables even in New Zealand. We have falling water tables all around the world. We're using up an awful lot of land right now. I don't see how you can use, that you've got enough resources to feed the planet with the demand of meat in the conventional way meat is made today. Otherwise, the price of meat just goes way beyond Kobe beef today. It would be higher. So what's an alternative? And this doesn't mean that you give up your animal industry in New Zealand. It just means we're going to grow in new areas. And one way you can do it is you can take a sheep. When it's born, you got the umbilical cord. Take the blood from the umbilical cord. In there is tons of stem cells, embryonic stem cells. Take those embryonic stem cells, stimulate those in a medium, and then grow meat. Because what we're eating, well, at least in some cultures, we're not eating the eyeballs, we're not eating the bones and so forth. We're eating the meat, So you want a hamburger, produce a hamburger. Don't produce a cow. A cow takes a long time to grow up. It takes a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of fertilizer, a lot of land. It's a big deal to get that hamburger up. And pollution and all the rest of the problems. So why don't you cut all that out, go right from the stem cell, and make the meat. It also has the advantage that you don't have to ship stuff all around the world. Now, this doesn't mean that we're going to have no more meat from animals. Maybe, but I don't think so. Just like artificial diamonds. We have artificial diamonds today, but people really want the original as well. So there'll still be a market for meat, but I think that the large growth that's going to be needed will be coming out of stem cells. Now, you could also start to create different flavors and different lines of meat production, because then you can take the culture, just like you do with yogurt. You start with the culture and you move it around. You can start the same thing with the stem cells with production systems. So you could decentralize animal production worldwide. And it has the advantage that all these problems of these factory-produced horrible things and the concentrations of species, and the concentrations of Europe, and the concentration of disease, which is going to spill out new kinds of diseases we haven't seen before. To avoid that, it would be wise to decentralize and cut out growing animals and just grow the meat that you want to eat. So that's one of the futures for the animal industry. Going back to the idea of making a living about who you are, how many people, as you view this, are interested in Maori culture right now in the world? 10 people? 10 million? 10 billion? I don't know. Probably more than in your neighborhood. In the old days, if you wanted to share your culture or your ideas, you had to be within a walking distance. So that limits the number of people. But if in 2058 you've got 9 billion people, how many people have to be interested in different parts of indigenous culture? Some people might be interested in music, some people may be interested in art, craft work. How many? Okay, so if you can get out to the market, which you can, to those 9 billion people, begin to do it now, slowly but surely, so that the culture then can be reinforced. Because people will, after all, will be, if you've got a large enough market, people start to say, hey, I want the authentic dance. I don't want to have Harvard University's students from Chicago pretending to do the dance. I want the real McCoy. Maybe in cyberspace, but live cyberspace. Maybe my avatar in the dance with you, etc. So we can still have many indigenous cultures and languages reinforced. Why? Because you're hitting a much larger market. It's hard to maintain a small culture in a large world without access across the system. If you're just able to get the income and support from a small number of people, the dominant society wipes you out. So, if you cut across the dominant society, dominant culture, and reach out to the entire world, and again, 2050, 2058, your processing power as an individual is the equivalent of all the human brains on the earth. Well, if you can't figure out how that you can get to the right people at the right time with the cultural expressions that you're interested in, it then reinforces those cultures, well, you can fill in the blanks. So, if different indigenous cultures in the world want to survive, that is a plan that sounds to me like it should work. The other plans I'm hearing about, doing lectures and giving speeches, is sort of nice, but I don't see it having the economic base to survive. And I don't think everything's got to be economics, but economics is part of it. All professions have their rule of thumb. One of the rule of thumbs in futures research is whatever you look at, it's going to turn out more complex than you think. So imagine institutional structures being more complex than you think in the future. One of the institutional structures we're working with at the moment in the Millennium Project is what we call a trans-institution. Now, trans-institution is an idea. The Millennium Project is organized as a trans-institution, but there's no legal status, at least as this recording is being made, for trans-institutions. I hope if anybody looks at this in 2058, you'll tell me, well, of course we got trans-institutions. It's the most successful economic model in history. Okay, right now you have non-profit law, you have profit law, and you have government to a large degree. And then you've got intergovernmental sort of things. Imagine that you create, say for AIDS or for poverty reduction or intelligence increase, doesn't matter, a trans-institution. What would it be? Let's call it intelligence increase organization. You want to make a thing to improve the brain functioning of all the people in New Zealand. Okay, so who knows the most and who's the most interested in brain functioning in the university world in New Zealand? Who knows the most or who's the most interested in corporations in brain functioning, human resource development, that sort of stuff? And who in the government? And who in international organizations? And who in NGOs? So imagine you create a little group of 10 to 20 people that have a couple from each of these institutions, so that the governing body of the organization comes from each of these institutional categories: government, business, NGOs, universities, and international organizations. And when I say international organizations, I don't mean international non-government organizations. I mean international organizations like UN systems or World Trade Organization systems, any sort of international systems like that. So imagine your club is composed of at least one or two from each of these categories. Then imagine that you get your income or your sales go to each of these categories as well. Then imagine the people who do the work come from these different categories as well. This would be a trans institution. This is how the Millennium Project is organized. We have a little bit from all those different categories like that. The advantage of a trans institution is that it can act through all those organizations. You're not telling a government to do something. The government person there is doing it. You're not selling the pitch to the business community because the business community is in it. So the trans institution has to consider what's good for all these systems together and what their different roles are. You don't ask the heart to be a brain. You don't ask the brain to be a heart. You don't ask the business to be a nonprofit. You don't ask the nonprofit to be a government. All right? Let them have their own roles. But their interest and their influence into the overall strategies that get created to increase intelligence, for example, because a business community can make a business out of it. For example, we got mind building, and we got bodybuilding things all around the world. It's a big business, but we don't have mind building around the world. All right, so the whole business line, big income. So you got businesses doing things, you got governments doing things, all this to increase intelligence. But then they're coordinating and developing new ideas and creating the synergies among each other that makes the organization different. Also, if you talk to a business, it's different than you're talking to a government. If you talk to a government, it's different than you're talking to an NGO or a university. So when you talk to a trans institution, you have to have your business sense together because they're looking at the bottom line. You've got to have your values together because the NGOs are there. You've got to have your knowledge together because the universities are there. You've got to have your politics together because the government is there. And you have to have your international sensitivities there because the international UN systems are there as well. So your activity changes as a result of this. And that's been my experience and one of the secrets to why the Millennium Project has been so effective in the world with such a small budget. You know, we'd like to get it up, but nevertheless, it's very effective. So one of the new institutional structures in the future could very well be trans institutions. Secondly, now I'll do this so the camera can see it. The old idea of institutional structure was the pyramid. The king, the vizier, the president, whatever is on the top, and then all the rest of the people below. You can see that? Yeah, good. Now, we cut through that hierarchical power with a network. Okay? So you can have a network of politicians in different governments across the world, and they're going to be sharing their information, or if it's a corporation, the business planners, the different ones cutting across, and so forth. So that's the power of a network. It cuts across the authority of a hierarchy. Now, if you have two or more networks intersect, like in a node is an intersection of two or more networks, then you have the ability to draw on the values of the different networks and create synergies. Now let me define synergy as Buckminster Fuller, who invented the concept, did. You take a box and you put a wheel in a box, you get a wheel in a box. You put a wheel underneath a box, you get a wheelbarrow, and you can do a lot of work. So synergy is not the parts, it's the relationship of the parts that makes the synergy. So if you have self-selected, do not appoint members to a trans institution. That's a mistake. Repeat, do not appoint people to a trans institution. It's a mistake. It should be a self-organizing, self-selected system. That's what will make it powerful. If you say, oh, I got to have a person at the university, well, we'll get that one. And you start recruiting, it's a different deal. You're going back to a hierarchical command structure. That's not what we're talking about. You create something attractive, a newspaper article, movie, whatever the heck it is, to start to pull people in from the different categories. So this becomes a node. Now, so nodes then become more effective than networks acting alone. Now imagine that you go the next step and you create other nodes. You can then start to have the nodes interact with each other. At this, we could have, let's say, one of these could be for increasing intelligence. Another one of these could be for beating AIDS or whatever the issue is. Another one could be for reducing poverty. So what's the synergy among these things? Cutting across a lot of systems, a lot of synergies. Now, imagine the next step. So these become what I would call fields of play. They'll be called something else later on when somebody from Harvard writes the article up. In the meantime, we'll call it fields of play. So then imagine there are other fields of play. And then you start to hook up fields of play. At this point, you're in the complexities of organizational structures that will make no sense to people today. But anybody looking at this in 2050 will be chuckling and say, what a primitive, simple way of explaining it.